I says, if he wasn't crazy, to act crazy and do it so well for 30 years, you got to be a little crazy. so, so can you tell us about that? Hey everyone, welcome to another Sit Down with Michael Franzese. Hope everybody is doing well. All is very good, very blessed on this end. As always, we give God all the praise, honor, and glory for that. And today I'm going to be sitting down with Rita Gigante, the daughter of the infamous, I would say, Vincent Gigante, who was really the power in New York, head of the Genovese family, boss of the commission at the time. He was the power during my era in that life. My dad had known him fairly well. My dad was an amateur boxer. Chin was a boxer, and they knew each other during that time and always spoke well about him. And I was fortunate to have two meetings with him. And he was a gentleman to me, and I got along with him, and it was a pleasure meeting him. And, really looking forward to speaking to Rita because, again, we have a lot in common. Growing up with notorious fathers, I think sometimes people don't realize the impact that somebody of that stature has on the family. And Rita's overcome a lot of obstacles. She's got herself in a very good place right now. She has some real intimate stories about her dad that you don't normally hear. You know, there's always another side to people. And I think Chin did have that other side. We all know his story, walking down Houston Street. And I think you're going to enjoy, like I will, hearing from Rita. So Rita's waiting. Let's talk to her now. So Rita, pleasure to have you on. I've been seeing and hearing a lot about you, and you certainly have done some great interviews. A lot of people on my platform have been asking about you and saying, Michael, you should have Rita on. She's terrific. And, she's everything she's had to say has been riveting. I've been hearing that from people. So here we are.
Here we are. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. And we have a lot in common growing up with two, I would say, very notorious dads. My dad back in the 60s, as you probably know, very, very high profile, always in front of the media. And, I want to say this right up front, Rita, and I'll kind of set the tone here. I always tell people that the mob life, mafia, Cosa Nostra, it's an evil lifestyle. Now, what I mean by that, I'm not calling the guys evil, not at all. I mean, who am I to ever say that? I was one of them. I just happen to be very fortunate. But I've always said, I don't know, in my experience, any family of any members of that life that haven't been so impacted, many of them in a devastating way, including my own, mom and brothers and sisters. And so many of my former associates, their families have met the same fate. And I think people are really going to be interested to hear about your childhood, how it was growing up with your dad, when you first realized who he was. And so why don't we start with that?
Yeah, that's great. For me, I was born what you would call an empath. Okay. An empath means I can feel things on a deeper level than the average person who doesn't have that ability. For me, I'm extremely sensitive. But back in the day, I was born in 1967. At 5 years old, I had my first anxiety attack. I would want to be home all the time. I'd be crying all the time. I didn't understand why my anxiety was so bad. I didn't even know that it was anxiety. I was picking up everybody's energies around me, my family's energies, whatever was going on that I was unaware of, I was picking up, right? My mom was also prone to depression because of my dad had not just the life of the mob, but he also had a second family in that life. And so she was, unbeknownst to me, she was very depressed about that and anxious and upset. And I was also picking up her stuff, my dad's, my brothers, my sisters. And when you grow up in this life, I don't think people understand that when there's secrets and lies and you're sworn to what you would call, a secrecy, like, you shouldn't speak, you shouldn't open up your mouth, you shouldn't say anything about the family, you shouldn't, any of that. You just kind of know, you don't even have to be really told. but just growing up in it, it's kind of an unspoken, you know,
Right.
unspoken thing, right? So
Exactly.
growing up, I knew that. I knew never to ask questions, but I experienced something very traumatic at 5 years old, and it was my father who was beating a man in my grandmother's apartment, and I was underneath the dining room table of my grandmother's apartment, and there was music in the background, Italian music playing, and the TV was always on. The phone was always off the hook because he never spoke on a phone. And I remember, I can hear the footsteps, and like the guys were like upset, and he never heard my father's voice. And so I just remember this guy getting hit. He hits the floor, and I just look at him and he looks at me. His head is like this, and the blood is just gushing out of his nose, and it's starting to trickle to my feet. And I just put my hands over my mouth, and I froze. And how you scream on the inside, but nothing comes out, right? And I started to shake. And the only reason why I knew it was my father was because he kept hitting him. And every time I saw his hand come down, because I could only see him from his legs up, every time I saw his hand come down, I saw his pinky ring. And so I knew it was him. And then I remember him. I mean, he just beat the man, till he was done. And then he stepped on his face and he says, in a very low tone, he said, "I'm done with him. Get him out of here." And that was it for me. It was like, so an empath is so sensitive that I took that. Go ahead.
You were 5 years old at that point?
5 years old. And I buried the trauma. They found me underneath the table, shaking, crying. And they were trying to explain that, he was just angry and upset. And I was just devastated. And, a kid of that age takes that in and says, if I'm not good, something bad can happen to me. Daddy will get very angry and hurt me, and that's the mind of a child, right? So growing up, I feared that. So I never would ask questions. I never would. I always was the ears and the eyes of the family, but very rarely I would go to my sister to try and get some information. But even then it was on the hush, with all of it. And I knew he was important. Even at 10 years old, when I would witness certain things with people coming in and out of the house and speaking with him, and I knew he was important. I just didn't know what it was. So first he worked in a hat company. That was the first thing I got,
Yeah.
And then it was, he's
my dad was a dry cleaner. Yeah.
Dry cleaner. Yeah. I mean, so had no idea what it all meant, but I just rolled with it. The problem was, because of my sensitivity and because of my gifts that I have today, I just didn't know how to deal with it. So I was sick all the time. I either had upper respiratory infections, I had pneumonia, I had stomach issues, you name it, I had it. I was home, mostly home than in school when I was young, I didn't find out till I was 16, the truth, the whole truth. But during that time, I realized something's, not 100%. They're not telling me what the truth is here.
You realize something is up, and I know I had a similar experience, Rita. My dad, first of all, I don't know if I've ever said this before, but my dad was once in a while physical with my mom, and I saw that once in the kitchen of my grandmother's house, and it really shocked me. I was young too. I was maybe 5, 6 years old, and it really shocked me to a point where I got in between my dad and my mom at that point. And for some strange reason, it didn't make me love him any less. I just realized something was off. And then another time I seen him hit a guy too. I mean, I was probably 9 or 10 years old, and we were in Brooklyn, and he got out of the car to meet with somebody, and he picked this guy off the ground, then he slapped him, and I'm saying, man, what's going on? And when you see that at a young age, I mean, there's no doubt that it's going to impact you in some way, shape, or form. Maybe we don't even know it.
No, you don't.
You don't realize what's happening.
The trauma of it gets stuck in your body. The subconscious picks it up, and holds it until you're ready to release it, if you ever are. Otherwise, I tell people, if you don't release the trauma, it could make you physically ill, which is what was happening to me. I knew at a very early age I was gay, and I knew in this family that was a no-no.
That was a no-no, sure. Yeah.
And my uncle, my father's oldest brother was, and that wasn't, you
Really?
know, yeah. And I probably know most people probably don't know that, but
Did your dad know it?
yes,
He did.
yeah, he did. So I'm sure it wasn't easy for him, and he loved my uncle, but in that life, it just wasn't. The ego just was so in front of the soul that it was hard to get away from any of that. That was the only time I ever witnessed him um, hit anybody or have some physical violence. The only other time I remember you were talking about your mom. I remember my mom saying there was one other time where he hit her, and the only time was he asked her when she was pregnant to me. He didn't want any more children, and he asked her to have an abortion, and my mother flipped out because that is not my mother, and she told him to go fuck himself. And that's huge for my mother because she was just a good woman and a good wife, and so he just she told me he got like taken back, and he just took the back of his hand and hit her, broke a tooth. It was the only time he ever raised his hands to her.
You didn't see that.
Did you see that though? You didn't witness?
No, she was pregnant to me.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
But the other thing that people don't realize is the child can understand even when they're in the womb. So experiencing that as well, you don't know it when you're born or anything, but again, it goes into the subconscious and you carry it.
Yeah.
And that's something I had to release later in my life. There's a lot of physical stuff that happened to me, a lot of trauma that way. I talk about in the book. The one piece I haven't spoken about, I think, in any of my interviews, but I'll share with you is an incident I had with my brother. My mom was in the hospital to have a hysterectomy. I was 19. I had tried to come out to my mom and my dad once. And I had a very weird experience with that because my dad got very calm. Like I expected him to get up and just give me a beating. He got very calm and he just said to me, "No, you're just going through a phase, and kids go through this, and it's okay. You'll go through it, and then you'll be past it, and you'll get married and have kids." And then he was telling me I shouldn't hang out with my friends anymore, and blah blah blah. And I jumped back in the closet, But at 19, I was at my mother's house, and I was watching a movie with a friend of mine, who was my girlfriend at the time, but there was nothing happening. We were just watching a movie. And my brother got very angry about that I was there. He thought I was doing something I shouldn't be doing in my mom's house. And when he came over, there was a huge confrontation. And all I said at the end, I just remember saying at the end, "This family sucks." And with that, the back of his hand came up and he actually lifted me in midair. And when I came down, I came crashing down on the kitchen table. And I remember almost blacking out. And then he grabbed me, he ripped my shirt, he grabbed me, and he went to go and punch me. But I knew my life was finished. Like I saw everything pass before me. I thought, I'm dead, My sister jumped on top of me to block the punch from coming. But I literally soiled myself in that moment. And that to me was, again, when you go through as many traumas, you tend to bury it until you're ready to heal it. Because the mind can only take so much. At that moment, I was beyond, I knew my family wasn't going to be able to help me. I'd gone through enough with them stopping me from being who I needed to be, carrying lies that I didn't want to carry any longer because I watched all the lies around me, and I was just didn't want to be that, didn't want to be that secret holder, the liar, all of it. So I put myself in therapy, I just did it at 19. I put myself in therapy, and that's how it began, the healing process.
You put yourself in therapy.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And I got told, don't speak to anybody about anything but your anxiety. And my father tiptoed around me because he knew my anxiety was so bad. So it's not like he ever reprimanded me really or anything like that. He was almost afraid to rock the boat with me. But I will say that I also saw sides of him that I'm grateful for, because he was gentle in many ways with me. And he also was able to come out of character for a little bit when I would, get him up to dance to Elvis because he loved Elvis. He couldn't dance worth the shit, but, I would get him up anyway. He would come out of character for like, 10 minutes and then all of a sudden he'd go back into character, and I'm like, my God, what a way to live. I thought to myself, he's not behind bars, but he's in prison anyway. Like, where did he go other than 4 fucking blocks?
I got to tell you my experience with your dad. I only met him twice, but I knew of him, obviously. My dad was an amateur boxer, and obviously your dad was a pretty good boxer from what I understand. I know he was very close with Vito Genovese at that time. And my dad always spoke very well about your dad. He said, Michael, Chin's a real good guy if you ever have an opportunity to meet him. And he spoke well about him. And then when my dad went to prison and I became maid in 1975, he said to me, just remember who the real power in New York is, and that's Chin. He's always said that. So one day, I don't know if you know Freddie Giminelli. Did you know that name? They call him Fritzy.
Yes.
He was very close to your dad. He loved your dad. Yes. And he was very close with me. He was a bookmaker. And he sent for me one day and he said, Chin wants to see you. And he said, Michael, you don't understand. Chin doesn't see anybody. He don't care who you are. If he don't want to see you, he don't see you. I said, did I do something wrong? That was my first thing. He said, no, he wants to see you. So I go see him. And we're walking up and down Houston Street. He was not shaven. His hair was messed, the bathrobe, the whole thing. And he was telling me how much he respected my dad. And he had heard some stuff that was going on with me on the street. And he said to me, listen, if you ever have any trouble, he said, you come to me, you'll be with me. I was a captain at the time. He says, you'll be a captain with the Genovese family. Anytime you have any trouble, I have a lot of respect for your dad. Fritzy talks very well about you. And I said, wow, that's really nice. I really appreciated that. He was great with me for that time that we spoke. And we had another meeting, very, very similar, going back and forth. But, everybody knew who your dad really was and who the power was on the street. And so I kind of looked up to him in that way. He was legendary in many ways. And that was my feeling, But
he had a certain standard, which was admirable about that life, certain code of ethics. He was a very fair man. And he also helped a lot of people. Like, I don't know if people realize that, he would pay for people's rents and people who couldn't afford food. And especially he had an affinity for the elderly. So he would help anybody in that neighborhood. And I remember thinking to myself, God, I wish he could just feel free for a second. Because I put myself in his shoes, and that's why I was able to forgive him, because I could see him from a different perspective. And I thought to myself, I would not want to look over my shoulder the rest of my life to worry about who was coming next, And so there were fabulous qualities about him. He was very charismatic. He was very loved by the neighborhood. Absolutely. And, when he passed, it's like, I remember him, saying, when I'm finished, it's over, it's finished. It's all finished. Never wanted my brothers to be involved ever. So that was never going to happen. And he, as he got older, he got, I don't want to make people think he was, he was, though, he got softer, for me anyway, because I had a different relationship with him than the rest. So he softened up. We used to write each other letters back and forth from prison. He got to know me in a way that he didn't when I was growing up. Because by the time, listen, I'm 10 years, I'm the youngest, so I'm 10 years below my brother, who is, not the oldest. And then there's my older sister, who's about 16 years older than me. So I really didn't have him the way they did as a father, so to speak. He was already full-fledged involved in that life. Mm-hmm. And so I got pieces of him. So I had to take those pieces and kind of merge them and put it all together. And once I did, I was able to come to terms with it and heal, Well,
let me ask you this. Did you ever go on vacation with him?
Never. He went on one vacation with my mother on their honeymoon.
That was it.
Never left again until he went away. And he hated to fly. I don't even know if you know that, Michael.
No, I didn't.
He did not like to fly.
No.
Yeah, he wasn't a fan of it. And my father wasn't afraid of anything, but flying he did not like. It's the only other time he ever got on a plane, you know? So that's what I mean. It was like, I think once he was in and he was too far in where he couldn't turn back, he came to terms with it and said, this is my life now.
Yeah.
But I do think there was a moment where he could have, and he just didn't, you know? And Vito adored him.
Vito
So,
loved him.
yeah, once Vito got him, that was it.
Let me ask you when, and I got asked this so many times afterwards. Michael, was Chin really crazy or was he not crazy? And I don't like to comment on that. I said, listen, you saw how he was. I said, but let me tell you this. I says, if he wasn't crazy, to act crazy and do it so well for 30 years, you got to be a little crazy. So can you tell us about that? You know?
Yeah, I mean, when I found out there wasn't true, I understood why. I like a lot of pieces of the puzzle snapped into place for me. But I was devastated for the fact that when he would check himself into mental hospitals and we would have to go visit him, he was, you know, on the third floor with schizophrenics and bipolar and you name it, you know, the really sick people, right? They're mentally ill. And it would really hurt me to know that, you know, he did this and then it was like a mockery made of the people who were sick, you know, even though I understood why.
Rita, did you know from day one that that he wasn't really sick and that this was just something he was doing to protect himself, or?
I suspected that at a very, you know, young age. But when they told me exactly who he was and what he did, then I understood exactly why he was doing it. And I would go for walks with him and, you know, I would go into the cafe with him where he played pinochle and did some of his business. And I would sit and watch him play cards. And normally that wouldn't happen, but he took me in like you know, I guess he wanted to have some connection. And really the only connection we had was football, but that's because he liked to bet, not really because he liked any particular team. But I liked football, so we were able to connect on that level. And we liked a couple of the same movies, which I know people probably thought he never watched a movie in his life, but he loved Shawshank Redemption.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, that was one of the movies he really liked. And all the Westerns, he liked those.
Oh, we had that in common. My dad and I sometimes, we would go to a movie, we would go to 2 or 3 different theaters in the same day to watch a movie.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, he loved that also.
Cool.
But you know, could you imagine really what it took for him? What kind of constitution you got to have to be able to play that game for all those years?
I can't imagine. I cannot even imagine what it took. And I think what happens is, Michael, once you begin to do that and you do it for so long, you begin to believe and you begin, you know, and then it's just easy. Then it's like, you know, you can win an Academy Award. You know, he had certain doctors fooled and then certain doctors knew, but didn't say anything. And, you know, so yeah, this was a tough, brilliant, but tough for the rest of us, you know, because we were all having to go along with it. Nobody was going to, even though we might have felt it was wrong. I can only speak for me. I felt it was wrong. He's still my father. I still loved him. It wasn't going to be me that said he's not sick.
But how did you have a family? Were you able to have family gatherings where all your brothers and
We
sisters?
did. Oh, listen, if it wasn't for my mother's family, I don't know what we would have had, but because his whole family was in it to some extent, you know, his brothers. For us, our like family gatherings were a lot of my mother's side of the family. They were fun, very enjoyable to be around, loved to party. You know, they would come out on every summer to our house and pool parties and all of that. And it made it made up for the other side that was dark and, you know, depressing. Because it really was, you know, as a kid growing up, I would go to my grandmother's, you know, apartment, which was a 4-room apartment. But it was like a dungeon. And I remember, and I call it that in the book. I mean, every window you could, you know, it was dark. You didn't know if it was light or dark out. Every window was closed. There were bars on the windows. It's like you were locked in. The phones were off the hook. It was, you know, it was just depressing. It was depressing. when we moved to LaGuardia, it was a little bit easier because we were up so many floors,
Mhm.
and sometimes the shades were open, but most of the time not.
Did you ever see him talk on the phone?
Talk on the phone?
Yeah,
Never.
he wouldn't
Never.
use the.
And the only time I heard his voice was when he went to jail, and he called.
Yeah, he used to
That's
speak
it.
very low, right?
A whisper, not even above a whisper.
Yeah. And he was never, I know he was never caught on any tapes or anything like that, ever.
Nothing. He was, I mean, he was brilliant at keeping himself hidden and knowing how to do it. He was, I always said he could have been the CEO of any company in this world and he would have done fantastic because he was brilliant in so many ways. But back then there weren't that many choices,
Yeah.
in that life. When he was a kid, I mean, they grew up, they were poor, and once he got taken, he loved to box. But once he got taken under veto, it was enticing to him, and he was able to help his family. He was able to make money. He was running numbers, I think, at 14. They
Mhm.
told me.
Well, he grew up, your grandparents immigrated here, right, from Italy?
Yes, my grandmother was wealthy in Italy. She came from a very, very wealthy home, and they were very well schooled. She was going to be a pharmacist and a doctor like her father.
Mm.
And my great grandfather ended up witnessing something from the Black Hand. That's what they call the mafia in Italy. And he ended up committing suicide because they came to him and said, if you testify, we're going to kill you, your whole family. And back then, it wasn't like the way it is in New York. Back then, they killed your whole family.
Yes.
Here, they don't touch your family.
No, in Italy,
Um,
they do that.
Yeah, Italy, it's so different. And so he poisoned himself. He took strychnine. He was a
Wow.
pharmacist, so he knew how to do it. Unbeknownst to my grandmother, who had no clue that when she came here, my father was going to be who he was. It kind of was like the nightmare all over again for her. But she could have went on to be something wonderful. Her mother was a midwife. They say she probably brought in half of Naples, like half the children in Naples by being a midwife. So they were educated. They were well educated. They had servants. She came here. She was broke. She had nothing and would not accept anything from her family.
Yeah.
They sent her plane tickets. I can't tell you how many times to come home. But my grandfather's brothers were here already. And that's why he wanted to come.
Well, you say something, and that's one of the reasons too. My dad really liked your dad because they're Napolitan. They came from Naples. Yeah, my dad loved that about him. But when our grandparents came over here, I remember my grandparents, they would never accept welfare, never accept a handout from anyone. It was beneath them in a way, it was humiliating to do that. They just worked.
It said hard workers.
That was it. Hard workers, whatever way they can scrape together a dollar. And let me ask you this, because again, it's something we can relate to. Regardless of who your dad was, in the house, did he teach you good principles, good manners, a good way to conduct yourself?
I'd have to say I got that more from my mom and my grandmother because he was not available a lot that way to me. He wasn't. It was the underlying stuff that how we were connected. He so he was very religious. My father, he said 5 rosaries a day. He had religious icons everywhere, and he prayed a lot. But he would every so often, like something would come out of his mouth, and I'd be like, "Oh shit, did he just say that? Like, where did that come from?" Meaning something smart, like, and I'm trying to think of an example right now for you. Um, I mean, the classic example was, he said to me, you know who the real organized crime is. Once I figured it out, and once I knew, he says, you know who it is, right? I said, no, I don't. And he goes, the government,
Mhm.
And I thought about that, and I was like, you know what? He might be right about that. So like something like that just would fly out of his mouth, and I would sit and go, where did that come from? And then we would talk about when he started to work out and like do exercise because he had a bad heart and he had to have his valves changed. And I'd go in there and I'm watching him work out. Now I knew all about this, went to massage school. I was an exercise physiologist, the whole thing. I knew everything about the body. And he'd say to me, Ree, he goes, look at me. He goes, I'm on the bicycle. He goes, I'm doing, he's doing handheld weights. He goes, you do this, right? You do this? I'm like, yeah, I do it. I said, it's good for you. He goes, yeah, you got to do it every day, he says. That was the most conversation about anything, And at the end of every conversation is, make sure you take care of your mother. So there were times where he would shock me with stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that he could have that kind of personality about him,
Was he, let me ask you, was he humorous? Did he laugh a lot? Does he joke a
He
lot?
was humorous in a lot of ways, but he was very, I want to say, moody. So if he got up on the right side of the bed, you were good. If he got up on the wrong side of the bed, run for the hills because we didn't know what was going to come. Yes, he did have humor about him, but he could also be, there was two sides to that coin.
Yeah.
He can be, horrible in some instances and fabulous in others. So.
Yeah, let me ask you this, because you said he was very religious. Were you close with his brother, Father Giganti?
I was not.
No.
He used to come and visit my grandmother. And so that's when and when I was young, he would come to my house. I mean, listen, everybody got married by him, the whole thing, right? So he was close to the family, closer more to my siblings because they were much older, I had a connection with my Uncle Pat, who was gay, not because he was gay, just because he had a really sensitive personality. He was more on the quiet side. We used to go to his home. He used to make these awesome dinners because he was a fantastic cook. In those days, the men cooked,
Yes.
and they cooked probably better than some of the women.
And they were proud of it.
Oh my God.
They were the best cooks.
Yeah. I mean, my grandmother learned how to cook and my grandfather would teach her, but she didn't have to when she was in Italy, really. There were times where it was just awesome. And everybody would be sitting at the table. I remember New Year's, all his guys would come in a 4-room apartment. It was like 50 people in the apartment, you know what I mean? And we'd be celebrating and, popping champagne bottles and everything. And, it was fun, but he never went on vacation with us or anything. So those kind of things that you get from a father, I didn't see. And neither did my brothers and sisters, because he never went. My mother would take them, but not him.
Yeah, that's the part we missed. I mean, we went to, with my dad, maybe to Catskill Mountains, I think twice. And then he got in so much trouble in the 60s. He was in and out of jail, in and out of trials, and then finally went to prison for that 50 years. So we didn't get much of that. One thing I did appreciate about my dad, he never tried, whatever was going on in the outside world in his life, he never even spoke about it in the house. And at the time, he was under constant surveillance by 7 or 8 different agencies. He would walk past them like they didn't exist. He wouldn't acknowledge them. He wouldn't talk about them. He was, and I appreciated that. So he never wanted to say anything about it. That was it. Like they weren't there. He was in and out of jail, and it was a mess. But let me, and the reason I asked you about Father Giganti, I got pretty friendly or close with him because he was very active in Joe Colombo's Italian-American Civil Rights League that started in the early 70s. And I was there quite a bit, and he knew my situation with my dad. He was always very nice. He prayed with me a couple of times. So, yeah, I really liked him. And, he was a good man.
He helped a tremendous amount of people. I mean, he built up the Bronx.
Yeah.
I mean, unbelievable what he did for that whole, the neighborhood that he had some companies that he was able to do low-income housing, and he did extraordinary stuff where that was concerned. He only passed not that long ago.
Yeah,
he was the last one. He was the last one.
He had a good heart.
Let me ask you, cut to when Dad really had his legal problems and finally goes to jail. How did that impact everyone? How did it impact you?
When we got the phone call that he was, arrested, we were in Jersey. He was in New York. He was in the apartment by himself. They came. I think it was a battering ram right through the door, came in, got him. We were like, oh shit, like what's, and it was a battle, you know, the battle was long and it was arduous and it was hard for all of us, my mom, my brothers, my sisters, because, you know, there was lawyers on top of lawyers on top of lawyers, and it just felt like it was never ending. So emotionally, it was very draining. Um, we knew that they, you know, just on, people's hearsay and, the RICO Act and all that,
Mhm.
we knew he was going. What we were shocked about was they only gave him 12 years.
Yes, that was shocking.
Shocking. I thought, what, and he would have gotten out.
How old was he when he went in?
Oh God. He died at 77 and he did 12 years. So 65?
65. You're still fairly young.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And his heart was good and he would have made it out and he still would have been doing what he was doing. But when they came to him and said, we're going to go after the family for obstruction of justice, that was it.
Yeah.
Everything stopped. And he just gave it, he told them the truth of everything. He had to admit to everything. And I'm sure that devastated him because I'm sure he didn't want to give them that. But, he sacrificed himself for us, which was the beginning of his redemption, to be honest.
Mhm.
He didn't have to, and he did,
And how was he during his years in prison? Did you communicate with him quite often?
Through mail, I did. Only he spoke to really my mother on the phone and in very short conversations. And I speak to him on the phone too. But again, the conversations weren't long. And because he was still speaking like as if he was out,
Mm.
And anytime he wrote me a letter, he'd say, my friend Carl helped me to write this, so he still was, doing it. But again, everybody loved him in prison. No matter where he went, he made friends,
Yeah.
Um, and then 9/11 happened
Mm-hmm.
and he picked up the phone and he thought, God forbid something happened to one of us. And he called and he spoke
No.
like normal, like nothing. And that's all they needed.
Yeah.
So, and that was, the beginning and the end of that. But all in all, I think when he left here, I could feel his freedom, finally to be out of this craziness that was for 77 years of his, most of his life, you know. So it was heart-wrenching and yet relieving at the same time. It was like, oh, he's okay, he's safe, he's in a good place, he doesn't have to, he could be free and I can go wherever he wants and do whatever he wants. And then it was my mother who, was completely devastated.
Well, let me ask you, he was a strong person of faith. He believed in his Catholic faith. Even Father Giganti told me that in conversation. Yeah. Let's say he's in heaven. I believe he is. I mean,
no, 100%. I believe everybody goes there.
Yeah.
I believe the worst of the worst. See, I'm not a believer in hell. So I took that religion, that Catholic religion, and I just took from it what I felt very comfortable with. And the rest I just left.
Well, it's amazing to me how many guys, we all grew up Catholic. Every one of us were Catholic. And regardless of what we did, we still had our faith. And I always remember on Ash Wednesday, all these gangsters would come together. We'd all have ashes on our foreheads from, and really observed, our faith. We really believed it, regardless of what we were doing. And that was kind of a strange thing, I guess. People can't balance that, and say, how is that possible? But it is what it is. But let me ask you, when he was towards the end, was he sick for a while before he passed away?
He was starting to get swollen. My mom said his legs started to get swollen, which means, congestive heart failure. There was talk about them screwing with his medication. There was talk about him not eating as good as he should have been eating. At that point, when you know you're not coming out of a place like that, I'd be eating fucking devil dogs and Twinkies too, whatever made you feel good, popcorn, whatever. So probably was a combination of things, but I think my father, wanted it to be fast and simple. Like I think I think we're all that powerful enough where we can will ourselves for anything. And I just thought he said, I'm out of here. And for a split second, I remember him coming and telling me, and most people don't know that I speak to him on the other side, but I remember him coming and saying to me, it was easy. He said, I had about 10 seconds of, oh shit, when he was starting to fill up, his lungs started to fill up so he couldn't breathe. And then it kind of overtook him. He says, like drowning. He says, you surrender to it. But it was only about 10 seconds of that, and then it was done. And his mother came for him, and his brothers came for him. Even his baby brother, he said, who died before him, who was Vincent. So there was another Vincent.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah. And he died very young. They were in Italy, and he pulled a hot pot of boiling water on top of himself
Ooh,
in the kitchen.
wow.
And they couldn't save him. He had, like, I don't know, 3rd degree, 4th degree burns, whatever it was. And they lost him in Italy. And when my grandmother got pregnant again, she named my father Vincent. So there was a Vincent before my dad, which I know not a lot of people know.
No, that's a new revelation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, listen, him, my dad, they were certainly the last of a breed that we'll never see again. There's
No,
no question
it's
about it.
dead.
Never see it again.
It's
Whole
dead
life-
because there's
whole
no
life
more of the
is-
morals and the values and it's just
You know,
not there anymore.
Rita, regardless of anything, and I know, I'll take some hits for this, but first of all, I'll tell you this, your dad is spot on. The government is the organized crime. And today, there's so many people worse than we ever were on the street. And I'll say that, and I don't care who gets upset, it's the truth. The way they're acting today, at least we had some morals, we cared about our neighborhoods, our communities, and many times our families. And what I'm seeing going on today, I would have a great conversation with your dad.
no doubt.
I'm sure you would. I mean, he tells me all the time. He says, I feel bad you're all going through this because he doesn't have to anymore. He doesn't have to be in the middle of it. But I remember him saying, they can't get a piece of me, so they're gonna come after me.
Yeah.
Meaning they can't get a piece of what they're doing what he's doing, right? And they're getting away with it. The fact that he's doing it makes it illegal, and they can't get a piece of it, so they're gonna go after him and take him off the street.
And they're doing
I remember him saying that.
and they're doing it 10 times worse, believe me. Because you know why? Because they take an oath to uphold their office and to take care of the people that elected them and be honest and upright and honorable. And the minute they get in office, it's the opposite. But so let me ask you this: what are you doing now? Because I know that you're committed, Rita. I know that you're committed to helping people. I've seen that, and it's very admirable, obviously, and. I'm sure you can be a benefit to a lot of people after what you've been through. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, the lifestyle I grew up in and my father being who he was the perfect storm to get me to where I am today. And all people always say to me, would you go back and do it over again? And I'd say, absolutely. I got to where I am because of that, So I am a psychic, medium, healer. I'm an author. I wrote my memoir. And I've done many, many teaching events. So, and so I help people get through their traumas. I help them move forward into life. I help them with forgiveness. I help them with owning themselves and being proud of who they are, regardless of what their family thinks or their friends think or anybody thinks. Because if you can walk through that fire, like I said, you walk through the fire of the family, especially when you're in a family like this where, it's very close knit, it's very, very, you don't betray your own, right? So my father says to me in spirit, he says to me, I betrayed myself and I betrayed those around me, meaning us. He says, I didn't realize until I was here how much I could have gone a different path, a different way. So you get to see that piece. But I have the opportunity now to work with him on that side. And he comes into my readings and he helps me with people that were either in this life, got out of the life, or there was one kid who wanted to be in the life. And he came through so strongly and said, this is not for you, not for you. And so I don't know if that kid backed out, but these are the kind of things where I say to myself, God, what better than something you love to do in the life, right? There's nothing better than that, right? I always knew I was going to help people. Always knew I would touch the masses in some way. I just didn't know how. And when I learned how to connect to my higher self, they call it, my own spirit, my own source, and God, some people call it God, some people call it love, whatever it is. When I figured out how to connect to that and heal myself, it opened up the space for me to be able to help others heal themselves. Now, I want to be very clear. I'm a conduit. I am the vessel that brings in the energy of the spirit, but I want people to know that they heal themselves. I am just that vessel. Because I don't want people to ever think that they need to give their power to anybody. They are empowered already. Something I had to learn in this life. And I learned that because I had those experiences that I didn't feel empowered. You know, I felt like I had no power in this family. And I had to learn to live that and become that. And now I'm helping others to do it.
Well, you used adversity in your life and you turned it into a powerful tool to be able to channel that into helping others. And it's very admirable. And not everybody can come through what you've come through and do what you're doing now. So, and I would encourage people that want to get in touch with you and maybe you can help them, because Rita, there's a lot of people out there that need help, you know.
Just by getting all the emails from some of the other interviews I did, I can see that and all over the world. It's not just here, you know, and that to me can't ask for more than that. Really, it's amazing, the response and the love and the outpouring of, you know, my heart is full. Honestly, my heart is full. I'm very grateful for it. I'm hoping that whoever watches this knows that they can do the same thing. I mean, that's the idea, right? To share your story so that people know, wow, maybe I can do that too. And they take the first step, you know, leading the horse to the water. And then hopefully they do it.
Well, that's it. You know, when people see that you can make a change and come out of a difficult situation, it's motivating and inspiring. And, you know, I've heard it all my life. And it's like you said, it's not anything we had planned, but just by overcoming adversity, people are attracted to that because they want it for themselves. Yes. So
that's it. They see the light. They want the light, right? And just like you and I, we've taken something very personal and we've rendered it universal, so that everybody can connect to it. And that's, to me, that's, you know, the most important thing.
So there it is. I really enjoyed the conversation. You know, it felt like speaking with family to me. I mean, we had so much in common, you know, growing up with our dads, the way we did, and having the experiences that Rita had, the experiences I had. So it was a great conversation. Felt very much at home. And hope you all enjoyed it. And her website is listed if you ever want to contact her. And so that's it. So hope you enjoy it. And we keep bringing you good content. That's our goal all the time. Thank you for supporting us. Over 1 million subs. Thanks to all of you. Appreciate it very much. How do I always leave you? Same way. Be safe. Be healthy. God bless every one of you. And yes, I'll see you next time.